Hello, my name is Protik Mukhopadhyay. I'm an entrepreneur and an author. I'll be hosting the Reimagine Sales Systems podcast, where I'll be bringing some of the industry thought leaders who will be sharing their go-to-market strategies for their business systems.
So today I have the pleasure of having Mike Sitter with me. He's the VP of Business Ops at Sisense. And today we'll get to hear his journey and learn from him. Thank you for joining us.
All right. Thanks, Protik. Nice to meet you. Happy to be here.
So Mike, I had a few questions for you. As you might have seen in other podcasts, our listeners are interested to understand your journey. So if you can share a little bit about your journey in the enterprise world, that'll be really insightful.
Sure. Yeah, I may have taken a reverse approach to a lot of people. My journey actually started in a large B2B enterprise company almost 20 years ago, working in sales operations. But my first major role was at a company called Quest, who was later bought by CenturyLink, where I focused on sales operations and sales enablement. As I've gone through in my career, I've worked in the data center business at a smaller public company. My last two roles have been at SaaS companies, at software companies that are in that $100 million ARR range and both private. So I think what's kind of interesting about my journey is that I've been able to learn some things that large enterprise companies do really well and identify the right pieces of those to install in smaller companies who are growing fast, potentially looking to go public, but in all reality looking to scale. And a lot of that comes around developing process, developing technologies to support scalable growth in the business.
Thank you. That's a very interesting insight. Let's get a little tactical in terms of your recent activities, maybe in your past company or your current, but what is the code to cash or the Revops strategy that you're trying to enable at Sisense?
So I think for Sisense, again, it gets back to being able to drive predictable, repeatable revenue in a company that's in a very hotly contested market when you look at the BI analytics space. And so as the company's grown organically, there's a need to develop a more consistent revenue ops function and a quote to cash strategy to help support that growth. And so on the organizational level, what we're really trying to do is take marketing operations, sales operations, and customer success operations and put that under more of a unified umbrella to make sure that we're developing processes and KPIs and technology that supports the continuum of revenue operations. I think a lot of companies in our space tend to tackle those problems in silos and with a goal of growing as fast as possible, and then they end up with very disparate processes and disparate ways to bring customers along their journey. From a quote to cash perspective, it's really setting the company up for eventually, ideally, a pre-IPO scenario where we have the right processes and the right controls in place. A lot of that's enabled by technology, but some of it is also just basic blocking and tackling around business rules and policies and processes and bringing people who aren't familiar with that kind of environment into a realm where you have to be simultaneously agile in growing revenue, but you also have to have the structure in place to make sure that you can do that consistently quarter over quarter and deliver predictable results to the investors.
Yeah, I mean, that's, I think, your experience in working with large companies. I think the discipline that you're now put in these high growth companies makes sense. So that's really insightful. We'll do a double click on that. So what are the systems and processes that you have internally developed that you talk about predictable revenue, also to enable alignment with your business stakeholders?
So one thing that I discovered, and this is probably my last two roles coming into companies that are very similar in their size and in their journey, is that we have a pretty robust collection of applications and tools that support the revenue process. And in a lot of cases, those tools aren't necessarily rationalized and need some work. From our perspective at Sisense, everything really starts, like for a lot of companies, around having Salesforce as our CRM platform, and then looking at tools around customer acquisition. So Marketo as a marketing automation platform, all the data enrichment tools that go into scoring and prioritizing customers, from Sisense and Dun & Bradstreet. We're now at a point in our journey where we have been using a CPQ solution in DealHub, and we haven't been using that for all of the business. So one of our big priorities this year is to make DealHub the single quote to cash solution for not just new business, but for all of our deal types, and then also obviously tie that into revenue recognition and accounting systems like NetSuite and Zuora. We're also dealing with, as a result of acquisitions that have been made in the past, continuing to integrate and rationalize the tech stack between two companies that were using different solutions for different parts of the process. But my ultimate goal in terms of our quote to cash strategy is to rationalize the tool set, get to a smaller set of best in class tools to support that process, and to drive consistency for all of the groups in terms of how they interact with those systems.
That's really helpful. In terms of Mike, your maybe if you want to talk a little bit, what is adoption and the activity that you were looking at? You mentioned about DealHub, and you want to make that your global or standard CPQ for all your businesses. So what is the current state? Like, how are you people using it? What does the adoption look like? And how did you essentially get to this point?
Sure. Well, we've been a DealHub customer for going on 4 years, and up till this point, we've only been using it for new business, and I think that's due to a couple of factors, and both of them are ones that we're trying to address. One is at the time we implemented DealHub, they weren't necessarily in a position to help us with things like subscription management and renewals from a CPQ perspective. The other is that we didn't really have the structure internally from an IT or from a systems team perspective to keep pace with their product roadmap. So there was a lot of features that they've implemented in their product over the last few years that we frankly just haven't been able to take advantage of because we didn't have the right people to support that and to tie the business process in with the technology. The other issue is, and I think this is really important for anybody that is looking to implement CPQ, is if your underlying CRM data model isn't in a place where it can take advantage of those things, then you're going to have limited success with the CPQ system. And that's what we saw early on with DealHub. Rather than it being a DealHub limitation over the past year, it was really the fact that our governance around how we managed Salesforce and how we looked at customer accounts and data cleanliness, how we managed contracts and subscriptions in our CRM was holding us back from being able to extend the use of CPQ for our customer success teams for our professional services teams. So that's the journey that we're on this year, is to really start with rationalizing and improving the CRM data model before we re-implement essentially DealHub as that one CPQ to handle all of our transaction types.
Thank you, Mike. That's a great insight, I think, adoption and then getting it. What were some of the challenges you faced? I know you talked about some of it, but in terms of like, if you were to do this all over again, whether with Salesforce and DealHub, and you said there were some features that DealHub act in terms of renewals, but any best practice or lessons learned that you could advise some of our listeners who are looking to do this project that you can kind of share with us?
Yeah, I think there are a few that I can think of. One is, and it's kind of cliche and you hear it a lot, but you really have to start with how you want your business to run from a business standpoint before you try and tackle the solution with technology. And there are a few things that I think have been missed in the past that we're trying to address now. One is when you're specifically around CPQ, you want to make sure that you have a product model and a structure that fits the business and can scale. So, how do you want your product hierarchy to look? What should your SKUs be? What are your product rules around bundling and things like that? Things like approval processes, and how do you want the business to decide which deals are good deals versus which deals need more scrutiny? What do you want the customer experience to be from a order form perspective, from a contract perspective? If companies don't do that work up front, it's going to make the solution that much harder to implement and is really going to hurt your adoption. The other is, back to my other comment from earlier, is you really want to make sure that you have the right team set up, whether you use a third party or you decide to staff it in-house, but you really want resources that are committed to the project, have good project management skills, also can work across product, across sales, across customer success to bring these things together and define your business rules. Those were things that I think, like I said, have been missed in the past, but we're very conscious about that going into our re-implementation that I see as success factors if you're going to have an efficient deployment of CPQ and drive the right level of adoption among the users.
That's really helpful. Few questions left for our podcast. 2020 was a really interesting time as COVID, right? And 2021, like, what are your priorities? Like, as you look at 2021, you mentioned something about making DealHub as your global solution, but can you share a little bit about your priorities and if some of them were actually impacted or prioritized because of COVID?
There are a couple things that we're focused on this year. I think that the COVID impact we definitely saw primarily on our embedded customer base, and to some extent on new business that we were seeing or not seeing as a result of the slowdown. But as we transition from being an in-office type company to more of a hybrid/remote work environment, I think the ability for technology and processes to enable all of our sellers and all of our CSMs in this remote environment is a lot more impactful. So we've been focused on things like revamping our sales enablement platforms to deliver better information virtually. We went to a virtual sales kickoff this year and shortened the format, but really tried to drive impact in the messaging. And then our biggest priorities this year are really around our overall product strategy and brand messaging, making sure that we're positioned in the right area of the market relative to the competition, and then enabling all of our messaging, all of our tools, all of our processes to match that new messaging. I think the biggest impact that we're trying to make from a metrics perspective this year is more around individual rep productivity and yield, more than anything else. So we want each of the AEs that we have to individually be more successful, and we want to make sure that we have a greater percentage of them actually hitting their number.
Right. Yeah. Awesome. And my final question, Mike, we have a lot of young listeners, people starting on their career. Maybe they are business analysts, maybe they are IT or Salesforce admins. What advice would you give them? And also, if you're hiring, maybe you can share some of the roles that you're trying to fill.
That's a great question. There is, from what I can see, there is still so much opportunity in this space for both people on the Revops side as well as on the IT side. There's a lot of problems that companies are still trying to solve, and I think some of those problems are even more urgent now that we're in a different working environment. But I would say, what's worked really well for me is just to have a constant sense of curiosity and wanting to really understand how businesses work across the spectrum. As an example, one of the big shifts that we made on our IT team is we restructured those teams, and we, rather than have business analysts and admins focused on a specific system or a specific process, we restructured the team to have them oriented around a function within the company. So whereas we might have had a business analyst that only worked on Salesforce or only worked on NetSuite, we shifted that to have a business analyst that had the marketing team as their customer, or had the sales team as their customer, had the customer success team as their customer, which really helped people in terms of their overall engagement and just alignment with the business. So I think that, for anybody looking to get in this space, really not only focusing on a particular set of skills, but also focusing on really understanding the why and the impact of a particular role, and who you're serving and what problems you're trying to solve is really important. It's an interesting question too about the hiring, because we just went through a massive hiring exercise in the Revops team, and we're pretty much fully staffed. Although I think we're looking for a marketing business analyst to support the marketing and the BDR teams, and it's more of a technical role that is really the big thing that we're looking for is a Marketo admin, which they're harder to find than Salesforce admins. And but we want somebody that really understands Marketo, but also understands marketing processes and campaign management and things like that. I would think that's the one role that we're looking to fill right now.
That's awesome, and hopefully, with this, COVID and being remote, it'll be much easier because I know earlier there were restrictions. But now at least anyone who's interested probably can apply no matter where they stay. But That's awesome, Mike. Really appreciate you've been really open, sharing your thoughts. Thank you for your time, and we really like to hear from you again. Thank you.
Great. Well, thanks for the time and the opportunity.
So with that, I would like to wrap up this podcast. Thank you all for tuning into Reimagine Enterprise Sales Systems. To listen to more exciting podcasts, please visit my website protikm.com or protikm.com, where you can subscribe to the show in iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcast, and other channels that you follow so that you'll never miss your show.